Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of The Shadow Side with Safriana. I am so delighted to be joined by a wonderful friend and collaborator today, my friend Miran. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Miran. I am a therapist and owner with Inner Self Healing Center and coach for Healing Hearts Dating.
Yes. And so I'm Safriana Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide fellow therapist and founder of Living Lunas. And Miran and I have just finished wrapping up a project that has been long in the making and filled with purpose and meaning. And we're going to get into so much of that today with the topic that we've picked. So, the topic we're going to explore today is dating and trauma. And
Mhm.
both of us quite intimately and professionally understand what trauma in dating looks like because it's, been some of our own experiences, our clients'
Mhm.
experiences, and our experiences. We've done our own research and education to really look at the impact of this. So, this all started, Miran, you had shared with me, last year, sometime early in the year, that you were noticing these trends on
Mhm.
especially Facebook. You were in some different Facebook groups and you were seeing that there was just so much pain and such swirling. Can you tell me a little bit about how that all got started and what you noticed?
Yeah, so first of all, after a long marriage, I got divorced and then went on the dating apps myself for dating. And everyone would say to me, "Oh, you're so refreshing." And I'd say, "I am, okay." you know, but they would say, "Yeah, everyone else is so like negative." And I was like, "Oh, that's okay." So that was kind of my first clue that people weren't always dating in a healthy way. And then I started finding these Facebook groups and my client work and all the things, and they would just talk about the trauma and, oh, narcissists and red flags, and everything was so negative. And it made me so sad that people were really trying to find love and connection, but they were so scared and then feeling so hopeless. And it just made me really, it was thousands of people on these groups and then clients, and they'd say, well, they're saying this and I just have to disconnect because that's a red flag. And I'm like, or is that just different perspectives? Or I think people really don't understand the difference, and they're not connecting, and so they're single and they're hopeless, and it's really sad. So I thought, why not, use my personal experience and also our therapeutic experience and knowledge to help people feel a little more empowered in the process.
Yeah, so many great points that you raised. And yeah, there's all this just swirl around
Mhm.
fearing relationships. And, I'm a trauma specialist. Like, that was my
Yeah.
specific specialty in therapy. And almost all of our stuff rolls back to early trauma. And so we're
Yeah.
constantly projecting our own unique little T traumas in most cases, but big T traumas in other cases. We all have
Yeah.
some form of trauma. And again, it runs
Yeah.
on a spectrum, but we're applying that everywhere. And there is this epidemic of that narcissism accusation
Yes.
because, and we get into this specifically in our course as well, because it's not all narcissism. It is
Yeah.
often just not knowing how to communicate or having trauma and having trauma responses. And
Mhm.
sure, I would say, unfortunately, in our society, like, narcissistic like traits have been kind of normalized and in some cases even romanticized.
Mhm.
But again, like, it being an actual hardcore personality disorder is not usually the case. But when
Yeah.
we're immediately looking to that everywhere, we're going to
Yeah.
find it everywhere too.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like the more you're kind of reading and taking in about all this negativity, the nervous system is doing the opposite of connecting. It's trying to
Mhm.
keep you safe. And when you're in that, fight or flight survival mode, you're not connecting with your neighbor. You're running from the bear or whatever it is you need to be doing. And you're not connecting and finding love and, you know, authenticity and connection in those moments. And so people are disconnecting without even really realizing it.
Yeah, and that's, you really want people to connect. So much of your wisdom has to do with that deep inner knowing that we can connect to ourselves and that we can come out and connect deeply with others. And again, when we're all in this trauma narrative, we've
Mhm.
been traumatized in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of the people in these these groups that are talking to one another have probably had abusive scenarios, probably emotional abuse, at the very least, because unfortunately
Mhm.
that's very common, but it's often not
Mhm.
something that you can press charges against or,
Right.
have a restraining order or have a bigger boundary around. So a
Mhm.
lot of these women in particular, I'm sure that I really do
Yes.
want to just say that men do experience sexual and dating violence as well, and
Yes.
intimate partner violence as well. But a lot of these groups are women
Mhm.
centered,
Right.
where they're
Right.
getting together and sharing. And that's what interests me there, is it's like they've lost their disconnection, like they've disconnected from themselves and their own internal
Yeah.
compass
Yeah.
of like, this doesn't feel right. This dating scenario, this person I'm dating, whether it's a man or not, like
Mhm.
this person doesn't feel right. I'm going to go online to a bunch of strangers and ask them if my response is
Yes.
right. So,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah, and then everybody is like, "Okay, well, here's the situation," and then there's hundreds of comments saying, "Oh, red flag, don't talk to him anymore," and it's like, well, okay, if there's a very if there's a verbal or physical safety, of course, right? But people are using these words like, oh, they're gaslighting you because we have different perspectives, or they're not agreeing with you in a moment, or they're not hearing you, and they're like, you're gaslighting me. And I love the fact that we're so much more aware as a society of what toxic behaviors are. I really, really love that. But I think from a not understanding perspective of the full picture of, when we're in that fight or flight mode, we're not listening to the other person's perspective. Of course, we're going to be defensive. Like, that's just normal human behavior. And I think people don't trust that anymore. And then they're kind of putting these labels on it that say, oh, this is toxic. Look, he or she is not listening to me. And then
mhm.
that's disconnecting. And so I really want people, men and women, or anybody who wants to find connection, to begin to find authenticity and trust in themselves, and the empowerment that, yes, maybe we, went through traumas where we were emotionally abused, or, whatever that was. And can you see the pattern along the way that you ignored, or the boundaries that you ignored? And I'm not at all victim shaming anybody, but it's, yeah, if we're actually aware of ourselves and communicating, we're putting those boundaries up front in
Mhm.
how we deserve to be treated. And when someone's not listening to us, we move on. But sometimes humans are just humans. And that is part of the connection, is going through that conflict and bonding through the other side of that vulnerability and conflict.
Yes, and it's this, we get worked into a groove. And
Mhm.
I want to
Yeah.
speak briefly to that because, you spoke to like when we recognize the signs, like we know there's something off here. We
Yeah.
ideally want to draw our boundary. And when we draw boundaries, it actually means I'm drawing this around myself. And if you cross into here,
Yeah.
I'm leaving. I will move
Yeah.
me and my boundary away. And so a lot of us, uh, we don't know that, first of all, because boundaries aren't really taught.
Mm.
We've probably had our boundaries violated before.
Yes.
Uh, and so there's this pattern of either not communicating them or thinking that it's on the other person.
Yeah.
And then
Both.
we end up wrapped up in the
Yeah.
patterns. We get worked into these grooves where it's
Yes.
like, well, my dad didn't respect my emotions when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and he always told me to swallow it down. So
Yeah.
now that I'm in this new relationship and this person I'm dating doesn't seem to feel comfortable when I start to get emotional and they're telling me, don't do that, stop crying. I'm now going to accept that as the relationship norm because that's
Yes.
what I experienced in the
Yeah.
past. And I'm going to keep acting that out. And so that's so much of what I know you want to help people understand, is that just because that was
Yeah.
your pattern in the past doesn't mean it has to be your pattern moving forward, especially not as
Yeah.
you're dating
Yeah.
and you're trying to find a person, or if you're like me, more than one person to spend a long, long time in your life with.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's really kind of sad in society right now is that, when we're dating back before all the internet and stuff, you were sort of dating a village, right? Whether you were in high school or college or whatever, someone kind of knew somebody else, and it was like, well, they're not crazy because they know this person, right? So it was kind of this little bit of trust, or you kind of had to be kind, sort of, to each other as much as possible because it would be told and gossiped about, and then so people were a little more aware of their actions and behaviors, and we don't necessarily have that trust moving forward. So our gates are up from the get-go because we don't have that sort of built-in level of community trust that we normally would.
Ugh.
But I think that which is so true. And also, we have our intuition, but we have to know the difference between what is our brain and our trauma telling us and what's our intuition telling us. And that we get to be empowered. We get to say, hey, if I don't hear from you in a few days, I'm going to assume that you're not really interested. We're not going to like take whatever comes for us. We're going to be part of that process. Hey, if I'm sleeping with someone, and even if we're not exclusive, I'm not sleeping with someone if they're sleeping with somebody else. You get to have that boundary and say, I'm sorry, but if you want to do that, I'm not sleeping with you. Or whatever
Yes.
the situation is, we get to have that boundary. Instead of being disempowered, we're completely empowered.
Yes, and that disempowerment, going back to why are we driven to seek validation from the external sources? It comes
Yeah.
back to that disempowerment. I need someone else to validate my experience.
Yeah.
And we don't just see this in the dating world. I mean, it's collective right now that we look to an external authority to save us, right? And we can absolutely get in that, like, well, I'm not worthwhile until I'm in a romantic relationship. So I need this person to come along and save me and do it all for me.
Yes.
And that's the,
Yes.
especially when we start to deconstruct gender norms. I cannot tell you how many women I have known who put it on, if they're heterosexual, they put it on the man
Yeah.
to take all the initiatory moves in every way, shape, and form instead of even
Hmm.
communicating that, like, hey, I maybe have a more traditional perspective and like
Yeah.
I would really
Yeah.
like to date a man who takes initiative. So I'm going to be looking to see you initiating contact and conversations.
Yeah.
They instead just kind of are like, it'll just happen if it's meant to
Yeah,
be.
and my male clients in the dating world are so confused. Right? They're like,
Because it hasn't
"Well,
been
I don't wanna, like,
communicated. Yeah.
be, like, toxic masculine, and, like, I don't wanna, like, make all the plans." Also, it's exhausting. I mean, not for naught, but, like, how often do you wanna make decisions all the time for people that you barely know, you know? So it's sort of like, and financially and all the things, right? So, and I'm not saying that you can't have your ideals, but there's 2 sides to it, you
And they
know?
have to be communicated. Like, you have
Yeah.
to have a conversation
Yeah.
about it. That's something that so many of us, I'm
Yeah.
not going to spend too long on this point, but for many of us who were raised in like a heterosexual,
Mhm.
heteronormative
Mhm.
household or even culture, we can very much just take those societal gender norms that have been all over our media.
Mhm.
And the Disney, I grew up on Disney princesses. Like, he
Mhm.
was supposed to sweep in and save me
Yeah.
and put me in a castle, and I was going to live happily ever after.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
not the reality.
No one is going to come in and swoop in and save us. We
Right.
have to do it.
So, as a now openly queer person, I have had to deconstruct all of that and look at all of that and figure out what
Mhm.
I want. So,
Yeah.
even if you're not queer,
Yeah.
that's the invitation, is to
Yes.
deconstruct what you want and
Yeah.
then communicate that
Yep.
stuff. Because if you don't, you're gonna see what you want to see. Now,
Yeah.
I want to really go into that. We're talking about trauma. So, unfortunately, if you've experienced relational trauma, again, we'll just use emotional abuse. There's all forms of abuse. There can be financial, there can be
Mhm.
physical, there can be using children against you, there can be
Yeah.
using your
Yeah.
sexual orientation or gender against you,
Mhm.
and then, of course, sexual violence. So, there's all forms of violence that can happen in any form of relationship, right? It doesn't have to be an intimate relationship, but we carry those wounds into our intimate relationships.
Yes.
So, what is the difference? I'll speak a little bit just to a personal experience to set us up.
Mhm.
They say that the first relationship you get in outside of an abusive one is the hardest. And I have
Mhm.
lived that because I was in a very long term, highly toxic, highly abusive relationship. And I had all the things we're talking about. Like, I can't speak up. This is just how it is. Like, all these patterns. I was very disempowered.
Yeah.
And I finally I literally had a day where I fell into self-love. Like all of my work kind of finally clicked into place. And I was like, oh, you don't deserve this, sweetheart. And so I left the relationship. And when I got into future relationships, which all of my relationships have been healthy since then by comparison and even by definition, I would say, but I was still so afraid to show up
Yeah.
and ask for what I wanted,
Yeah.
even though it was like I had people in front of me going, what would you like?
Yeah, please
Like,
give
I'm
us the
happy. Please
manual.
tell me.
Please give us the manual. We're trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I want to have a conversation about that trauma response versus checking the
Yeah.
reality that's really in front of us.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what would you say to that if you have that client that's like, oh, I'm dating again and I've had all these bad
Mhm.
experiences, but like I'm seeing this new person and I don't
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know what's happening and I think it could be terrible. Like what would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, speaking of your, Ike said it's almost like communication isn't really taught to us simply to people please. And it's exactly right. We're either people pleasing, we're fawning, and we're going, yeah, yeah, whatever you want is fine. Or we're like avoiding and running away because we
Yes.
don't know how to like stay in and be there. And so that's
Right.
absolutely right. And so, yeah, it's, so I'm going to say if you're having a, let's say, trigger response, your body's going to tell you, right? You're going to start to feel things and you're sort of going to go, oh my goodness, da, da, da. And then the brain's going to go into that fight or flight and create all the narratives of like, see, this is what happens, and this is going to happen, and da 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 da. Being present in the moment of this is all that I have to figure out in this second. I have no idea what's going to happen next. I'll deal with that when it comes. Is this something that one is something that I have noticed as a pattern that I need to say something about? Or two, do I need to get more information? Right? Or three, maybe I need to end things because it really is abusive and toxic, and that's fine too. But it's really like just being present. And what is this one thing in front of me? And
Yeah.
asking questions. If we don't have evidence, we do like CBT therapy and DBT, where we talk about the wise mind, right? Like we don't need to react until we know the facts. So maybe it's asking questions. Maybe it's, oh, well, I'm kind of thinking this, but let's see what happens as I gather more information.
Yeah.
Ask, you know?
Yeah, and don't test,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Testing, I've had so many conversations where someone, brings up I
yeah.
tested my partner the other day by doing
Yeah.
XYZ, and I'm like, and they failed, didn't they? Right?
Yeah.
Whenever we're testing,
People are
they're
not
doomed to
psychic.
fail. Yeah.
People want to be attuned, but they're not psychic. They can't read your mind. That's not
Yes.
fair.
So go and ask, yeah, ask the questions even if it's scary. And
Mhm.
Ike and I have our own
Yeah.
podcast and we've talked about these things very openly. So I'll just share an example. Like as a survivor of extreme uh intimate partner violence and
Mhm.
childhood sexual abuse, I could not like the thought of saying no. Oh my gosh.
The
Just like
disconnection. Yeah.
any literal point where I would have to say no, I would go into panic, like full
Yeah.
anxiety. And
Yeah.
so Ike and I in our early relationship really had to play with that. And I was like, can I like I literally said, can I practice saying no? And I would burst into tears.
Yeah.
I would say the word no and I
Yeah.
would have this full nervous system like
Yeah.
because it was so hard for me. And if you're in a safe relationship and you've established the relationship,
Yeah.
you can do that. You
Yeah.
probably don't want to do that on a first date with someone new, but that's where you're just assessing like, am I curious to keep seeing them? What do we have in common? Like, what are the foundations? You're
Yeah.
not meant to go in and trauma dump on a new partnership, but
Yeah.
that's where it's like, yeah, can I gather more information? Was it actually okay in this new relationship for me to say no? And the data was yes. I said no, and there weren't explosions, there was not violence. Okay, so we have to
Mhm.
reestablish what's really happening versus it's kind of like an overlay, like a mask goes on
Yeah.
of our trauma. And it's just seen through these mask goggles of like all of the bad things we've been through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to be like, okay, lift the goggles, put them back on, lift the goggles, put them
I'm
back
just
like,
looking at the person in front of me and the situation in front of me. But also, here's the thing, it's not even just our adult relationships, it's our childhood experiences. It's, attachment comes in the first couple of years of our lives before we even know. So when we're overly attaching or overly running away or whatever that is, it's so subconscious in our body that we're doing it without even thinking. So the question is, okay, why am I doing this? Right? If I
Mhm.
need to like have a fight, well, maybe like that's how I learned I got attention when I was 2.
Yeah.
Valid, but the adult is with us. We don't have to be the child alone anymore. We get
Yeah.
to say, "I'm sorry, I don't wanna do this," and then get in your car and go. Or, like, we're not powerless children anymore. So it's really important to understand, great, at one point, this kept us safe.
Mhm.
We love that child for having to be safe, but it doesn't serve us anymore.
Yeah. And we have to trust, I think that a lot of us, I do parts work. So I'm going to
I
speak
love
to a
Parker,
part
yeah.
of us that many of
Yeah,
us have, which is the part that fears if I, kind of relax my boundary and I don't look at everything hyper vigilantly, I'm going to miss the signs. And
mhm,
so it wants to keep that
yes,
hypervigilance. And so I just really want to remind us that we can build the trust that, like, if it really is dangerous, we are going to have our fight flight response and we're
yeah,
going to get the heck out of there. Like,
yeah,
if it's
yeah,
really
we're
that,
not gonna, like, not have it. It's always gonna
right.
be there, yeah.
But that
Mhm,
in most situations,
mhm,
we're not in danger in the dating world and
yeah,
we can just exit because we're like, sorry, it's not for me. Now we have all seen the crazy stories and possibly been a part of one of
right,
them
right,
where someone does escalate things, and that's where you really want to use your resources, your community resources, your
yes,
safety resources. And if you find yourself in a relationship where you feel stuck, like you can't leave because of a threat of violence, that is definitely where you need to
right,
use your resources, call your community resources. But many of us were not in that situation,
mhm,
but we feel like we could be, or we fear we could be because of those past
yeah,
experiences. So we're like blinded by that mask. So what are some basic things we can start to do, especially in swiping? Because swiping constant profiles is like
oh, goodness,
so activating to our nervous system because it's like reject, reject, reject.
yes,
Ooh, maybe, but what if they reject me? Reject, reject, reject.
yes,
Ooh, I really hope they message me. Like, uh, we do all of this mining of information so
yes,
quickly, and then we're getting inundated with, potentially, if especially if you are a woman, you're probably getting inundated with messages that aren't really
mhm,
what you want, but you might be getting just bombarded with information
yeah,
on top of your prior trauma. That's very activating. It's like one of the downsides of online dating. So, how
mhm,
can we regulate the nervous system a little bit more as we are dating, as we're looking on apps, as we're in the moment seeing like what could be a old
yeah,
trigger?
yeah.
What are some of these things that you recommend?
I'm gonna say we we have to look at what connects us and not what disconnects us, right? When we're getting to know someone, we're in the dating world, it's what's the thing that's going to hurt us later, it's going to break our heart later, that's going to cause problems later, and we swipe. Instead of, maybe you're on a date or you're messaging with someone, you're finding the commonality and you're connecting from there, right?
Mhm.
Because we're saying, oh, I don't want somebody who travels, they're going to be gone all the time, or I don't want somebody who works all the time, they're not going to be around. Whatever that is, we're making these really quick assumptions as we're swiping. And then we're disconnecting from people where, if we actually got the information, it might not be that at all. And so what we need to do is find that commonality instead of the thing that we're keeping ourselves safe from.
Mm. Yeah, and that that's wisdom for the whole collective right now, is to find
Yes.
commonality.
Yeah.
I think that we're
Connection.
so, especially when we're doing like the scrolling, and I mean, I met my spouse on OkCupid.
Mhm.
I met my boyfriend on another online site. Like, most of my past partners, unless I met them at college or we dated in high school, like, were online partnerships. And I know that feeling of literally just like, oh, I don't think I'd be attracted to them, or
Mhm.
instant first reaction is just kind of, eh,
Yeah.
no, no, maybe, right? And there's no depth there, and that is so disconnecting.
Yeah.
And we do this to each other all the time. We
Yep.
reduce people down to just the instant snapshot we see of them, or again, all of our prior stories, baggages, experiences, and that instantaneous
Mhm.
response, and then we just act on that. And
Yeah.
we definitely are struggling with connection
Mhm.
as a species.
Yes.
We're deeply divided. And I was just talking to one of my partners the other night, and I was like really reflecting on the state of our communication in the world, and
Mhm.
it's practically non-existent. People don't
So true.
largely know how to have conversations, and
Yep.
I think that triggers an extra level of trauma response in the dating world because a
Yes.
lot of people don't know how to have a darn conversation.
Yeah.
So what people the burned haystack method, I think, is totally a trauma response. And the burned haystack method is something I've heard of
She's
online.
single,
I don't know who.
by the way.
She's single. She created this method where basically the first sign of it not going the way you want it, you just delete, block, and you move
And I
on.
think like everything, there's sort of a
There's a
medium in that, right? Of course, you're
yeah.
not going to like waste forever, or if they're not listening to your boundaries. Yes, of course, we're not going to keep going. It's a waste of energy and time. But
Mhm.
also, people are human.
And we're awkward as heck
It's
because we
so true.
don't know how to communicate.
So true.
We didn't have a class in school that taught us how to like make eye
Yep.
contact or share with someone if we're uncomfortable making eye contact. We didn't
Yep.
have like how to have conversations and to keep asking deeper details and to get curious about one another. Like
Yeah.
we don't have education about this. So of course, half the people that you message don't know how to start or keep a
It's so
conversation
true.
going.
It's so true. I have one client who he's so witty and funny, and he'll make really funny, but then he'll keep doing that. And then they'll ghost him. And I'll tell him, "You're amazing and you're funny," but like he's like, "But isn't that?" And I'm like, "But when you do it for 3 days in a row," but he just doesn't know. He's like, I mean, 'cause he's so witty and smart, but he kind of keeps going. And I'm like, well, maybe you should like pull back a little. But people just don't. He's such a good guy. People just don't know, right?
Yeah.
They don't know how to communicate. So just say, okay, and change the subject. We get to be a part of that process.
Yes, and oh my gosh, like I bring this up in practically every conversation, but it's been groundbreaking for me to understand that humans are not all empaths.
Yep.
Not every human is an empath. Not every human can pick up on other people's feelings.
Yep.
The other type of person is what's called an energy sensitive, and they can kind of pick up on the general vibes, but sometimes they still miss the vibes and they don't read the room. Like,
Or they
not
create the wrong
everybody,
narrative.
or
That happens all the
or they
time for empaths. Yeah.
yes, they think they know what's going on,
Yeah.
but they
Oh,
don't, and
they're mad at
so
me. No, maybe they're just thinking. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and so people again aren't mind readers. Nobody's perfect, and we can't expect people to know what we're thinking, what we want, or to
Yeah.
always know when they're taking something too far. And
Yeah.
we
Yes.
could communicate that, and people could learn the lesson
Mhm.
if we communicated it.
Yeah.
But how many of us just run without communicating? Like,
Yeah.
this really did not work. And so people
Yes.
just have never heard that what they're doing is problematic. Now,
Yeah.
should people know it's problematic to do anything physical, sexual, etc., without someone's consent? Yes, they should. So those are your red flags that are non negotiable, and
Yeah.
you run the hell away.
Yeah.
But if it's like, oh, they are so socially awkward, they do not know how to hold a
Especially when
conversation.
we're anxious, which we mostly are when we're excited about someone, the language part of the brain is like inept.
Yes. So if we understand, oh, they're just as nervous to talk to me as I'm probably nervous to talk to them.
Yeah.
Well, what do I want to do to try and make the conversation go? Or what do I want to do? Like, do I care about this enough to ask them out on a date, even if I would like them to ask me out on the date?
Yeah.
Like, we're probably both having that kind of response on the back end. And oh
Yep.
my gosh, just talking about like the men that are not stuck in the patriarchal BS programming, but the men who are like they want to date, they want to have a good relationship,
Yeah.
and they really don't want to mess it up
Yeah.
and come
Yeah.
across as that kind
Yeah.
of guy who's problematic. So I've seen
Yeah.
so many men be
Yeah.
stuck in that too, where they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Aaron talks about that, right? Because he's got a lot of like male clients who, I'm going to say men sort of generically, they usually want to go after what they want. But there's like, okay, now I don't know what to do. And what if they don't like me? And like, what if it gets taken the wrong way? And and women are trying their best, but they're kind of got their shields up. And so where's the connection?
yes.
And so everyone's kind of freaked out. And so no one's really doing anything.
Yes, and it's just this loop of getting stuck. And Aaron, if you're not familiar, is our third co-instructor in our Healing Hearts dating course, which we'll share a little bit more about in a bit. But he has so many good points from
Yeah.
a man's perspective in the dating world. And
Yep.
Yeah, I think there again, going back to that gender stuff just briefly,
Mhm.
that's really screwed us up because
Yeah.
there are women out there that absolutely want to be the one who quote unquote wears the pants and run the show and be a little bit more on the dominant, of a relational side that would look like masculine energy. And there
Mhm.
are men who are like, I would love to be a stay-at-home dad and, do the cooking and the cleaning and just like support her and doing, pursuing her dreams.
Yeah.
And there's queer couples. And then there are men and women who pair very well together because that man is a go-getter and has that more like dominant in a healthy masculine
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
consensual way energy, and a woman who's like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I want. I don't want to make the decisions outside of my professional work day,
Yeah.
when of where we're going to eat dinner or these things, but all of that has to be communicated. All of it is in the nuance of the conversations
Yeah.
and the getting to know one another. And so again,
And
going
not
back to
making
what we
assumptions.
assumptions, yeah, and that kicked our conversation off with these Facebook groups where again, rather than like asking questions directly or following their gut or their intuition, people are running to places online
Yes.
to see if someone is dangerous. And
Yeah. So
that's
I think what's really important is to note that when we're babies, when we're kids, we didn't have autonomy. We had to listen to someone, whether it was teachers, whether it was religious leaders, whether it was our parents. We were always listening to other people to tell us, right? Okay, this is what we have to do. This is what makes you a good kid, a bad kid, whatever that is. There was always an outside authority telling us what was right. And so there's kind of a warped perspective going on now where we go to the outside world to validate. The problem is that when you are going into a situation where everyone's traumatized and then you're hearing hundreds of people talk about all this negative, very negative, oh, red flag, he's a narcissist, she's crazy, whatever that is, that part of the brain doesn't delineate what's their experience and what's your experience. It doesn't know the difference. It just, and then it doesn't know the facts to then help you stay safe, right?
Mhm.
Let's say there was miscommunication in a situation. They weren't really hearing each other. They were both a little triggered, and then someone got ghosted. And then they're going on to the group saying, look, he ghosts, he's whatever, or she. And you can't always get perspective that way. Then the brain's going, okay, they could ghost me at any time because we don't
Right.
know the facts that have led up to that. So it's so important when we're looking at this information that to note that our brain doesn't know what to do with it. It thinks it's our own experience from a victim mentality that it can happen at any time because it doesn't know the facts. So it creates even more anxiety and more trauma, it's trauma loading when we're
Mhm.
hearing all these things that even if someone could really like someone and they were curious, well, I haven't heard back from them for 5 to 7 hours, and then everyone's going, oh my god, they're cheating on you, da 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 da, right? And then the person's like, oh, okay, well, I'm no longer curious, and now I'm in trauma mode and I'm watching out for all the things, and then they're going to start disconnecting, and then the relationship's going to, and it's a terrible cycle.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that reminds me of something you said earlier about like people using the terminology but incorrectly, like saying, I'm being this is gaslighting when it's literally you disagree on something.
Yeah.
Disagreeing on something opinion wise is not gaslighting. Gaslighting is you knowing you did or said something and someone else telling you, no, you didn't, or you
But no,
remember
not
something
even. That's
clearly.
a defensive conversation because we all have our filters. But
Right.
remember that everything is a filter. So if someone's characterologically attacking you and getting rageful, that's narcissism, right? It's no, how could you forget about me? You forgot my favorite juice at the grocery store. It's like really like, what? That's the gaslighting. But when we're like, no, I said that, that's not gaslighting. That's everybody has their own filter in what's happening.
Yeah, it's convince trying to convince you that something large or memorable is
Yeah.
not true, or
Yes.
to fundamentally
Yeah.
change who you are, what you know at your
Yeah.
core to be true about
Uh-huh.
yourself. But yeah, it's not just this you had a basic disagreement, or yeah, you were both triggered, and no one should be yelling at each other or anything like that.
Mhm.
And that is what some of us learned how to do. So
Our
once we draw the boundary, does it continue? Or does that get respected and we can be in relationship? Like that's what we're looking for is
Yeah.
can we bring something up and someone else continue to relate and like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll work on that. But this instant gratification. I want to speak to this instant
Oh, yeah,
gratification piece because
yeah.
this is another thing you mentioned, the 5 to, like, they haven't responded for 5 to 7 hours. What's
Yeah.
going on? Oh my gosh, people have lives, and this is the problem with
Yeah.
having cell phones and this digital age is we are so used to instant gratification everywhere. We know we can go to amazon.com, and if we really want, we could have pretty much whatever we want at our doorstep
At the same
tomorrow
day.
morning or same day in some cases. Yeah. We know that because phones have notifications that people, if they're looking at their phone, should see it right away. And that's the assumption is if I'm glued to my phone all the time, I'm expecting that everybody else is glued to their phone all the time. And therefore they should see my message as soon as I message.
Mhm.
But that is not the case. People do have lives and work and,
Yeah, I want somebody who has a life. Like, maybe not days, but, like, I want somebody who's, like, in meetings or working and with friends and disconnected and then gets back to me when they can be intentional and present. I don't want somebody who's, like, constantly messaging me, like,
yeah,
especially with
that's
therapists, we can't get back to people very often.
right, and that's called enmeshment when you're, like, so worked into someone's life that every little
Mm,
facet has to be sunk together, and that's not healthy,
yeah.
and I think, this is such an interesting week because later on in this week, I'm having a conversation with someone else, on my other podcast, Breaking the Barriers, where we're gonna be talking about, like, soul level spiritual contracts in relationships.
Mm.
And a lot of us like to pretend that that's what's happening
Oh,
and
yeah.
that we're gonna find the one that we were
Yeah.
destined to
The twin
find, and
flames. Twin
it
flames are not what people think it is.
no, and that's actually part of what we're gonna get spicy about this later in this episode, later this week, because we have been trained to believe that there is that one that's our perfect other half,
Yeah.
and that once we find that person who is our perfect other half, we're gonna fuse into one ultimate couple being, and everything's gonna be perfect from there, and that is so not the case,
Yeah.
and that ends up setting up such unrealistic expectations
Mhm.
that people then misconstrue, like, again, the base oh my gosh, they haven't messaged for 5 to 7 hours, something must be wrong.
Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, no, we need to reality check that stuff because
Turns out the same person had 2 jobs. You know?
yeah, and to be making these kinds of leaps in early dating especially
Yeah,
is like you in the if there's a lesson I've learned the hard way, it's that relationships are meant to be built over time.
yeah,
Like they are not
yeah,
meant to be instantaneous. And yes, attraction can be instantaneous, but relationships aren't. They take time and depth to
yeah,
build.
yeah,
They can take years to really develop into a meaningful relationship where we can really openly communicate and know each other's preferences and stuff. That does not happen in 3 months. It doesn't happen
yeah.
in 3 conversations.
I'm also gonna say for attraction, it's not always instantaneous.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was in the dating world, there was somebody I went out with a few times, and it was like after the 3rd date, he was relaxed enough to be really funny. And I was like, "Oh, you're like it's coming out a little bit more, which I'm more attracted to by the 3rd date?"
Mhm.
And so it's not always instantaneous.
Yeah.
Someone's personality can be really a draw once things calm down and you can really be yourself and you can play and you can be a little bit more curious and all the things. It's not always instantaneous. And I think what we're doing in our first all my clients always have like one first date and they're like, no, I'm not attracted to them. Okay, right. What's the problem where you're having one first date and you're not attracted to anybody? Because our brain is hearing something, which is then going without us even being aware, disconnecting, right?
Mhm.
So our polyvagal nerve is like, no, and then we're going like this. Yeah, so, which the other person's mirror neurons are picking up on that, and then they're going to disconnect. So it's like all these things are happening without us even being aware. And then we're like, no,
Mhm.
we're not attracted to them. But what if we were staying open and curious and getting to know the good things about them and going, oh, they're really sweet. Oh, look, they're really like genuine. Oh, they're really trying. And it's
Mhm.
then you're connecting to that.
Yes. So it's this all just comes back to the need to rebuild the connection muscle
Yes.
as a collective, as a species, as individuals, as communities, this ability to communicate, to be with one another, outside of intimate contexts too, because that's what builds our
Yeah,
capacity for healthy relationships is robust networks of
yeah,
people supporting one another. And that can also help us see what we're looking for in relationships and what we're not looking for in intimate relationships,
yeah.
and you know really learn our preferences and our needs and our desires and our boundaries.
Mhm.
So we have to like let some of these shields
Yeah.
down, and that can be really, really hard after trauma. So let's talk a little bit about our course that's officially launched as of today, healingheartsdating.com, with the special course How to Find Love on Dating Apps, which we designed to go over all of these kinds of
Yes.
things: the nervous system regulation, the learning to love yourself and take care of yourself. Like that is all in it, as well as how to use dating apps to create profiles and things like that. But I think that the deeper work is about the communication and the like learning to.
Trusting internal self. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are you most excited about with this course? And just like with what we talked about today, I think we've talked about so many things that we cover in the course that like we
Mhm,
get into the how to work through it and what this
mhm.
means, and tons of things from the neuroscience all the way down to the actual regulation. Um, I'm just excited to share this wisdom with people. But is there anything in particular you're excited about?
I just want people to begin to trust themselves. I want them to really trust themselves and then really be aware of what they're putting out is what they're getting back. And so if you're putting out positive curiosity, openness, playfulness, that's what you're going to get back, and finding a relationship is what everybody is looking for, right?
Hmm.
And we want that. So I want people to feel empowered in themselves because it's not just about connection. You still have to know all these things as you're moving through to develop a good relationship for the long term, right? So these are skills that not just connecting with someone, but once you do connect, you find that great someone or someone's, right? You can move through in a good foundation for all
Yeah.
these things.
And that's, I think that is what ultimately this course is about, is really building your foundations powerfully so that
Mhm.
you can build that long-term success, so that you can. And long-term success to me does not mean being in a relationship for the rest of your
Yeah,
life. It means knowing and standing in your power, your boundaries, and all of
yeah,
that, and like being able to stay firm with that in the face of challenges.
yeah,
And to also have that openness to get curious and not just immediately go into the knee jerk trauma responses of like I need to hightail it out of here because this could be bad again, right? Like really
yeah,
invitations to reality check. And
yeah,
we have really built this such that you can have support at any level that you want, whether it's just going through our
mhm,
course in a self-paced way or joining our community to be able to get love seat coaching with Miran, or if you want to do one-on-one work and you want to work with a relationship therapist or coach, like we kind of have all of that built in because Miran, I really just want to speak to your beautiful mission of trying to unite hearts and trying to bring people that inner peace so that
yeah,
they can have a good relationship, because that's what most humans want. We just want to be in good relationships with each other, even if it's not romantic, just to have love and be loved, and
yeah,
to have that inner trust of ourselves that we don't have to be guarded all the time. So
yeah.
thank you for this mission. It's so important.
I really, really, if it lets people feel safe and secure enough to find a connection and find a relationship, it's worth all the work that we've put into it because we need the right now, especially we need our light to start really expanding.
Yeah. And that's exactly, so much of what I speak to in the world is just that we do need to find that inner love and light so that we have the capacity to shine it out in
Mm,
the world. and
yeah,
and there's a comedian, I don't know if his special is still on Netflix. It's pretty crude though, so I'm just going to give some warnings about that. But his name is Daniel Schloss, and he did a skit on if you only love yourself at 20-30% and someone comes along that loves you at 40%, you're going to be like, oh, that's an upgrade, I'm going for that. So, I really want to encourage you to slowly over time, whatever
Yeah.
your self love percentage is at, to build that muscle, to keep building that ramp upwards towards more and more self love. Because once you love yourself, 95, 100%, you don't settle for anything. I think that's the wisdom. So, Miran, I want you to just see if there's any other wisdom you want to share today. But the piece of wisdom, if there was one thing I
Mhm.
had everyone take away, it is that really looking at what you are willing to tolerate, because I hear so
Yep.
many people ask the question when they've dated and they've had a lot of trauma, like, why do I keep attracting the same kinds of people? They're emotionally unavailable, or they're just so toxic, and there must be something wrong with me. Nope. It's literally that you just haven't built those boundaries yet that say, I
Mhm.
don't let that in my field anymore. It
Yeah.
comes in and I see it and I go, no thanks. And there's not perfection with this. It's simply getting better over time with
Yeah.
recognizing what that really looks like and going, oh, no, thanks, never mind. Because those people will try to attach to whoever will accept and love them with the 20% they're able to give. So they're
Yeah.
literally going to latch on to whoever. So don't be that person that they are going to latch on to. Make yourself as boring and unavailable as possible. I heard the gray rock method for dealing with narcissists is to just make yourself like a gray rock and just be as boring as possible, because they'll have no interest in pursuing you at that point. Just unavailable. But
Well,
yeah, is there?
also, if you get up to a narcissist, you can be yourself, because if you find a narcissist, you'll know, and then you can say, "No, thank you."
Nope, out of
Yeah,
here.
I don't have to be anything. I can just say no, because I'm gonna understand it and recognize it.
Yes. So all kinds of different ways to
Yep.
approach, building your boundaries over time, but that's the work, is building those boundaries to where you know and can assess what's for you, not for you, because you're not broken. You
Yeah.
probably just have a fuzzy sense of what you're supposed to take.
And I'm gonna also say, yes, there's boundaries in what we need to take, but it's also how much are we actually communicating what anything looks like? "Hey, when I'm feeling really sad, I'd really love a hug from you." Right? So then you can't come back a year later and say, "Oh, they're never nurturing my sadness." I mean, and I'm not saying, again, not victim shaming, but it's how much of it are we not actually expressing for the other person, and then we're feeling disconnected and not loved enough, and that's an important part.
Yeah. So communicate, communicate, communicate. I think that's our big takeaways today. Communicate, get curious,
Yep.
know yourself, and build that self-love muscle, because those are all so important. Thank you so much for coming on today,
Oh,
Miran. This was so much
fun.
fun, and you just have so much like the neuroscience and stuff, even though I'm a therapist, doesn't quite stick for me. So it's so lovely to just hear you articulate it and explain things in such a understandable way for everyone. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And again, healingheartsdating.com. Go check our website out. It's a really pretty website. And maybe you'll find something there that's useful for you, especially if you are entering the dating world. And otherwise, we are here. You can contact either of us for more information or to see how we can support you.
Yeah.
So, again, thank you so much, Miran. It's been a delight. And
Bye.
until next time, my friends, I'm Safriana Luna. Bye for now.
Bye.